Hey, what is up, everyone? I hope you guys are doing well. Today we have a unique story narrated by my friend Frederick. I hope you guys enjoy it and watch till the end, guys.
There are warriors in the Imperium of man whose very existence defies comprehension. They stand guard over the most sacred places in the galaxy, clad in armor that gleams like captured sunlight, wielding weapons that have ended threats before they could even draw breath to scream. They are not space marines, though both serve the Emperor. They are not soldiers, though they have fought in wars that would break lesser civilizations. They are something altogether different, something older, something closer to the divine spark that created them. They are the Adeptus Custodes, the 10,000, the Emperor's own companions. And the process of becoming one of them is unlike anything else in the grim darkness of the far future. To understand what it takes to become a custodian, you must first abandon everything you think you know about the creation of superhuman warriors, the familiar narratives of recruitment and transformation that define the Space Marines, the brutal trials that forge mortal men into angels of death. These bear only the faintest resemblance to the alchemy that produces a custodian. Where the Adeptus Astartes are mass-produced miracles, created in batches of hundreds according to standardized protocols refined over 10,000 years. Each custodian is a singular work of art, a masterpiece of genetic manipulation and alchemical augmentation that consumes years of effort and resources that could equip entire regiments of Imperial Guard. The difference is not merely one of degree, but of fundamental philosophy. A Space Marine is created to be a perfect soldier, a component in a larger machine of war that functions through discipline, brotherhood, and adherence to doctrine. A custodian is created to be a perfect warrior, an individual of such capability that he needs no support, no orders, no guidance beyond his own judgment and the singular purpose that was woven into his very flesh during his transformation. Where a Space Marine finds strength in his chapter, his squad, his brothers in arms, a custodian stands alone, sufficient unto himself, a one-man army capable of decisions and actions that would require an entire command structure in any other military organization. This distinction shapes everything about the process of becoming a custodian. From the moment of selection through the years of transformation and training that follow, there are no aspirants who fight their way up from the underhives or prove themselves in tribal warfare. There are no trials of courage where the worthy are separated from the unworthy through tests of strength or endurance. The path to becoming a custodian begins long before conscious choice enters the equation, with decisions made by others, with genetic legacies written into bloodlines over generations, with political considerations that stretch back to the very founding of the Imperium itself. In the depths of the Imperial Palace, where golden corridors stretch for miles beneath mountains of rockcrete and adamantium, there are chambers where the raw materials of future custodians take their first steps toward transformation. These are not the recruitment halls of Space Marine chapters, filled with desperate youths seeking glory or redemption. These are nurseries of a sort, though the word seems inadequate to describe the reality of what occurs within them. Here, infants barely old enough to focus their eyes are subjected to procedures that would kill adult humans outright, their bodies and minds reshaped by arts that predate the Imperium itself, knowledge that came from the Emperor's own hand during an age when humanity was still clawing its way back from the brink of extinction. The children who enter these chambers are not random selections plucked from the teeming masses of Terra's population. They are the sons of the most ancient noble houses of Terra, bloodlines that can trace their ancestry back to the Unification Wars and beyond, families that have served the throne since before there was a throne to serve. This is not mere aristocratic privilege, though privilege certainly plays its part. The selection of candidates from specific bloodlines is based on genetic markers that were identified during the Emperor's earliest experiments in creating superhuman warriors. Subtle variations in DNA that makes certain individuals more compatible with the alchemical processes that will follow, more likely to survive the transformation that will unmake and remake them at the most fundamental level. But genetics alone is not sufficient. The families from which custodian candidates are drawn maintain certain practices, certain traditions of selective breeding and genetic preservation that ensure the continuation of these favorable markers. They understand, in ways that are rarely spoken aloud, that their sons are not truly their own, that they are stewards of genetic material that belongs to the Imperium, temporary guardians of bloodlines whose true purpose lies not in worldly power or dynastic continuation, but in providing the raw material from which the Emperor's guardians are forged. This knowledge shapes these families in profound ways, creating cultures of service and sacrifice that set them apart from other Terran nobility, making them something between aristocrats and breeding stock, elevated in status precisely because of what they are willing to give up. The selection of a specific child from these families is a process shrouded in mystery and ritual. Tech priests of the Mechanicum, specialists in genetic analysis whose knowledge is considered sacred even by the standards of Mars, examine newborns with instruments that can read the future written in their genes. They look for more than just the right genetic markers. They search for a quality that defies easy definition, a potential that exists somewhere between the physical and the metaphysical, something that might be called destiny if such concepts were not considered dangerously close to superstition by the rational minds of the Imperium's scientific elite. When a child is chosen, the family that produced him experiences something between pride and grief. They know that their son will achieve greatness beyond anything they could imagine, that he will stand at the side of the Emperor himself in a way that no normal human ever could. But they also know that the child they raised, the son they loved, will cease to exist in any meaningful sense. The transformation that awaits him will erase almost everything that made him who he was, rebuilding his body and mind into something so far removed from baseline humanity that calling him their son will become an act of faith rather than biological fact. The age at which this selection occurs is crucial. Unlike Space Marine aspirants, who are typically chosen in late childhood or early adolescence, after their personalities have begun to form and their bodies have developed enough to survive the brutal implantation surgeries. Custodian candidates are selected in infancy, often within their first year of life. This timing is not arbitrary. The alchemical processes that create a custodian work best on flesh that has not yet fully committed to its final form, on bodies that are still malleable enough to be reshaped without the catastrophic rejection reactions that would occur if the same procedures were attempted on older subjects. This means that unlike a space marine, who retains at least some memory of his life before transformation, who can remember his homeworld, his family, his aspirations and dreams before he became one of the Emperor's angels of death, a custodian has no such memories. His entire existence, from his earliest conscious moments, has been shaped by the transformation process. He has never known what it means to be merely human, has never experienced the weakness and limitation that defines mortal existence. In a very real sense, he has always been what he is now, always been more than human, always been a weapon in human form. The transformation itself begins almost immediately after selection. While the child still lies in his cradle, before he has learned to walk or speak, the first alchemical treatments are administered. These are not the brutal surgeries that characterize Space Marine creation. No implantation of additional organs, no grafting of new physiological systems onto existing biological architecture. The process that creates a custodian is more fundamental, more invasive, in ways that have nothing to do with surgical incisions or physical trauma. The Emperor himself, during the age when he walked among men and worked his will directly upon the Imperium, developed the techniques that would become the foundation of custodian creation. He drew upon knowledge that predated the age of strife, genetic sciences from the dark age of technology, combined with arts that might have been called sorcery if anyone had dared to name them so in his presence. What he created was not a process that could be easily replicated or scaled up to mass production. Each custodian required his personal attention, or later, the attention of the most skilled gene wrights who had studied directly under him, learning techniques that could not be written down or codified, but could only be passed from master to apprentice through years of careful instruction. These gene wrights, the master alchemists who oversee the creation of new custodians, work with tools and substances that exist nowhere else in the Imperium. Some of their materials are harvested from the Emperor himself. Genetic templates and alchemical essences drawn from his divine form during the millennia before his internment upon the Golden Throne. Others come from sources that are never discussed openly, biological materials of such rarity and value that entire worlds might be considered a fair trade for a single vial. The work they do is part science, part art, and part something else entirely, something that touches upon the deepest mysteries of human potential and the mechanisms by which flesh can be transmuted into something greater than itself. The infant who undergoes these treatments experiences changes that begin at the molecular level and cascade upward through every system of his body. His DNA is not merely edited, but fundamentally rewritten, transformed from the human genome into something that, while still recognizably derived from human stock, has been elevated to a degree that approaches the divine. This rewriting occurs through processes that combine advanced genetic engineering with alchemical procedures whose theoretical foundations remain mysteries even to the tech priests who perform them. The gene wrights work with substances extracted from the Emperor's own genetic material, essences that carry within them templates for transformation that cannot be fully explained through conventional science. Every cell in his body becomes a microscopic engine of transformation, capable of feats of healing and adaptation that would seem miraculous to anyone who did not understand the science behind them. The cellular changes begin with the mitochondria, the organelles responsible for energy production. These are restructured to operate with efficiency that approaches theoretical maximum, producing ATP at rates that would cause catastrophic heat damage in normal cells, but which the transformed cellular architecture can handle without difficulty. The enhanced energy production supports the accelerated metabolism that characterizes all enhanced warriors. But in custodians, this goes far beyond the improvements seen in space marines. His bones begin to grow denser and stronger than adamantium, while remaining flexible enough to avoid the brittleness that usually accompanies such density. This seemingly impossible combination is achieved through alterations to the bone matrix at the molecular level, creating a crystalline structure that can absorb and redistribute impact forces in ways that conventional materials cannot match. The bones develop a micro-architecture of stress channels and reinforcement patterns that adapt in real time to the forces being applied to them, making them nearly impossible to break through ordinary combat trauma. Even sustained falls from great heights or impacts that would shatter ceramite leave custodian bones intact, though bruised tissue around them might show signs of stress. The marrow within these bones undergoes its own transformation, becoming a biological factory for producing blood cells of enhanced quality and quantity. A custodian's blood carries oxygen with such efficiency that he can function in atmospheres that would leave normal humans gasping and unconscious. His white blood cells actively hunt pathogens with an aggression that makes his immune system virtually impenetrable to conventional diseases. His platelets respond to injuries with such speed that minor wounds seal themselves within seconds, and even major trauma initiates clotting responses that can keep him fighting through damage that would incapacitate any normal warrior. His muscles develop with a complexity and efficiency that allows them to generate forces that would tear apart normal human tissue, while his tendons and ligaments become living cables capable of transmitting that force without damage. Each muscle fiber is restructured at the cellular level, replacing the relatively simple sliding filament mechanism of normal human musculature with a more sophisticated system that allows for precise control of force output across a vastly expanded range. A custodian can perform tasks requiring the delicacy of a surgeon's fingers, or deliver strikes with enough force to crush ceramite armor, and the transition between these extremes happens without conscious thought, guided by neural feedback systems that operate below the level of awareness. The cardiovascular system that powers this musculature is itself a marvel of biological engineering. A custodian possesses not 2, but 3 hearts, though this description is somewhat misleading. What he actually has is a primary heart that has been enlarged and enhanced far beyond normal human capacity, supplemented by 2 auxiliary pumping systems that assist with circulation during periods of extreme exertion. These hearts operate in coordination through a network of neural connections that allows them to synchronize their beating patterns for maximum efficiency. During rest periods, the auxiliary hearts can actually shut down completely, allowing the primary heart to maintain circulation on its own. But when the custodian enters combat or undertakes physical activity that would kill a normal human through cardiac arrest, all 3 systems engage, pumping blood through his enhanced circulatory system at pressures and volumes that supply every tissue with exactly what it needs. The respiratory system undergoes similar improvements. His lungs increase in size and capacity, developing alveolar surfaces with far greater gas exchange efficiency than normal human lungs can achieve. But more significantly, the lungs gain the ability to extract oxygen from atmospheric mixtures that would be toxic or simply inadequate for normal human respiration. A custodian can breathe comfortably in thin mountain air that would leave normal humans dizzy and hypoxic. He can function in toxic environments for extended periods, his enhanced respiratory system filtering out contaminants that would corrode normal lung tissue. And in truly hostile atmospheres, he can slow his respiratory rate to such a degree that he requires only a fraction of the oxygen that normal humans need, extending his operational capability in vacuum or near vacuum conditions to periods measured in hours rather than seconds. The digestive system becomes a biological converter of remarkable efficiency, capable of extracting nutrition from materials that normal humans could not process. This is not merely an improvement in digestive enzyme production or nutrient absorption. The entire gastrointestinal tract is restructured to include specialized tissues that can break down almost any organic matter into usable components. A custodian can, if necessary, consume materials that would be completely indigestible to normal humans and still extract sufficient calories and nutrients to sustain himself. This capability extends operational independence dramatically, allowing custodians to survive in environments where normal humans would starve despite the apparent abundance of organic matter around them. The nervous system, perhaps more than any other biological system, defines what makes a custodian different from all other warriors. The transformation of neural tissue begins with the spinal cord and brainstem, restructuring the fundamental pathways through which sensory information travels and motor commands are transmitted. The speed at which nerve impulses travel increases by orders of magnitude, achieved through a combination of enhanced myelination and changes to the ion channel proteins that generate action potentials. This increased conduction velocity means that a custodian's reaction time approaches the theoretical minimum imposed by the physics of neural signaling. But speed alone would be useless without corresponding improvements in processing capability. The brain itself undergoes restructuring that affects every major region and many minor ones. The cerebral cortex thickens and develops increased folding, creating vastly more surface area for neural processing without requiring a proportionally larger skull. The neurons themselves are enhanced at the genetic level, developing dendritic trees of greater complexity and synaptic connections of higher fidelity than those found in normal human brains. These changes create a cognitive architecture capable of processing information at rates that normal humans can barely imagine. The sensory organs are similarly enhanced, though not through crude augmentation like the bionic replacements used by the Mechanicum. Instead, the natural sensory apparatus is improved at the cellular level, creating capabilities that exceed normal human perception in every domain. A custodian's vision is so acute that he can track fast-moving objects that appear as blurs to normal observers. He can perceive details at distances that would require magnification for normal humans to see. His color perception extends into infrared and ultraviolet frequencies, allowing him to detect heat signatures and see environmental features invisible to unenhanced vision. And his visual processing speed is so rapid that he can analyze complex visual scenes in fractions of a second, identifying threats and opportunities that would take normal observers several seconds to notice. His hearing similarly transcends normal human capability, able to detect sounds across a frequency range that extends well beyond the normal audible spectrum. He can locate sound sources with precision that rivals sophisticated acoustic sensors, using minute differences in arrival time and intensity between his two ears to triangulate positions in three-dimensional space. And his auditory processing allows him to filter out background noise and focus on specific sounds of interest, conducting conversations in the middle of raging battles where normal humans would be completely deafened by the cacophony. The sense of touch is enhanced to a degree that allows for fine manipulation of objects without visual guidance. A custodian can feel minute variations in texture that would be imperceptible to normal human fingers. He can detect vibrations transmitted through solid surfaces from considerable distances. And his proprioception, the sense of body position and movement, is so refined that he maintains perfect awareness of where every part of his body is located and how it is moving at all times, even in the chaos of melee combat where normal warriors would quickly become disoriented. Perhaps most remarkably, the transformation produces changes that affect what might be called parasensory perception, abilities that exist at the boundary between enhanced normal senses and something approaching supernatural awareness. Whether these capabilities result from extreme refinement of normal sensory processing or represent something genuinely beyond conventional biology remains a subject of debate among the few scholars who have access to information about custodian capabilities. What is clear is that experienced custodians often demonstrate an ability to detect threats before they manifest in ways that can be perceived through normal senses, responding to attacks that come from behind or around corners with a prescience that suggests either incredibly sophisticated environmental awareness or something approaching precognition. But the physical changes, as dramatic as they are, represent only one aspect of the transformation. The brain of a custodian candidate undergoes modifications that are, if anything, even more profound than those affecting his body. New neural pathways are created, entire regions of cortical tissue are restructured to enhance cognitive processing speed, memory storage capacity, and the ability to integrate and analyze information from multiple sources simultaneously. The end result is a mind that can track hundreds of variables in real-time combat, that can predict enemy actions based on microscopic tells in posture and movement, that can formulate and execute complex tactical plans in the time it takes a normal human to recognize they are in danger. This cognitive enhancement is not achieved through crude mechanical augmentation, like the cerebral implants used by the Mechanicum, nor through the hypnotic conditioning and memory imprints that accelerate space marine training. The custodian's enhanced mental capabilities are woven into the structure of his brain at the genetic level, making him not merely smarter or faster in his thinking, but fundamentally different in his cognitive architecture. He perceives the world with greater clarity and detail than any baseline human could achieve. He processes that information through neural networks that operate according to principles that approach, in their efficiency, the theoretical limits of biological computation. And he does all of this without any sense that his thought processes are unusual, because for him, this is simply how thinking feels, how it has always felt since the moment his consciousness first emerged from the fog of infancy. The development of these enhanced capabilities does not happen overnight. The transformation of a custodian candidate from infant to fully realized guardian of the Emperor spans years, sometimes decades, depending on the specific individual and the particular genetic legacy he carries. Throughout this time, the child grows in chambers deep within the imperial palace, surrounded by attendants who are themselves products of extensive genetic modification, servants of the Adeptus Custodes, who have dedicated their lives to the care and training of these future warriors. These attendants are a curious mixture of caregivers and trainers, providing the emotional nurturing that any child requires while simultaneously beginning the educational process that will eventually produce a custodian's comprehensive knowledge base. They speak to the children in dozens of languages, teaching them High and Low Gothic, the battle cant of the imperial military, the ritual languages used in religious observances across the Imperium, and even the dead tongues of Terra's pre-unification civilizations. They tell stories that are both entertainment and instruction, tales of ancient heroes and forgotten battles that carry within them lessons about tactics, strategy, courage, and sacrifice.
You know, what really fascinates me about the Custodians is how they represent something fundamentally different from every other faction in Warhammer. We're so used to thinking about the Imperium as this vast, grinding machine that produces warriors like factory goods. Space Marines get created in batches. Imperial Guard soldiers are thrown into the meat grinded by the millions, but the Custodians, each one is irreplaceable. Each one represents decades of work and resources that could equip entire armies. And honestly, I think that makes them tragic in a way that even Space Marines aren't. A Space Marine at least has his brothers, his chapter, that sense of belonging to something larger. But a Custodian, he's been alone since infancy, transformed into something so far beyond human that he can't even relate to the very people he's sworn to protect. He's perfect, immortal, incorruptible, and completely isolated. The Emperor created the ultimate guardians, but I wonder sometimes if he considered what that perfection would cost them in terms of their humanity. Anyways, let's get back to the story.
As the children grow, as their enhanced bodies develop at rates that would seem impossible to anyone unfamiliar with the transformation process, their education becomes more formal and more comprehensive. By the age when a normal child would be learning basic arithmetic and struggling with simple sentences, a custodian candidate is mastering advanced mathematics, studying stellar cartography, learning the principles of military strategy that take normal officers decades to understand, and beginning their introduction to the philosophical and historical knowledge that will eventually make them not just warriors, but scholars and diplomats capable of representing the Imperium's interests in any context. The physical training begins early as well, though not in the brutal trial-by-fire manner that characterizes Space Marine preparation. A custodian candidate does not need to prove his courage or endurance through dangerous trials because these qualities are being built into him at the genetic level. Instead, his training focuses on precision, control, and the development of skills that will allow him to make full use of the superhuman capabilities his body possesses. He learns to move with grace that seems impossible for someone his size and mass, to strike with devastating force without telegraphing his intentions, to react to threats with speed that makes him appear to be moving before his opponent has even begun their attack. The weapons training that a custodian receives is unlike anything provided to any other warrior in the Imperium. While Space Marines are trained primarily in the use of bolter and chainsword, weapons designed for overwhelming firepower and brutal close combat, custodians are educated in an arsenal that spans everything from the most advanced Imperial technology to ancient weapons whose designs predate the age of strife. They learn to wield guardian spears and sentinel blades, weapons that combine sophisticated energy fields with monomolecular cutting edges and integrated bolter mechanisms. They master the use of storm shields that can deflect incoming fire through localized gravitic manipulation. They become proficient with weapons that exist nowhere else in the Imperium, relics from the Unification Wars or earlier periods whose secrets are known only to the 10,000. But more importantly, they learn to fight without weapons, to recognize that they themselves are the true weapon, and that any tool they carry is merely an extension of their will made manifest. This philosophy shapes their combat training in fundamental ways. Where a Space Marine might be trained extensively in the use of a specific weapon pattern until he can field strip and reassemble it blindfolded, a custodian learns principles of combat that transcend any specific weapon. studying angles of attack and defensive positions, force vectors, and momentum transfer, the geometry of violence that underlies all martial conflict, regardless of the specific implements involved. The training environments used to produce these capabilities would seem excessive to anyone unfamiliar with Custodian standards of perfection. Deep within the Imperial Palace, there are chambers where gravity can be adjusted from 0 to levels that would crush unenhanced humans instantly. There are combat ranges where hololithic projections create enemies that react with intelligence rivaling living opponents, adapting their tactics in response to the trainees' actions with sophisticated learning algorithms. There are sparring halls where custodians test themselves against training servitors constructed from materials harder than tank armor, programmed with combat routines derived from every enemy the Imperium has ever faced. A typical training day for a developing custodian might begin with solo practice sessions lasting several hours. The young guardian practices forms with his chosen weapons, repeating specific movements thousands of times until muscle memory makes them as automatic as breathing. But this is not mindless repetition. Each practice session represents an opportunity for refinement, for discovering microscopic improvements in technique that might make the difference between victory and defeat in actual combat. The custodian's enhanced cognitive capabilities allow him to analyze his own movements with the precision of a tech priest examining a machine, identifying inefficiencies and correcting them through conscious application of biomechanical principles. Following individual practice comes paired training, where custodians test themselves against each other in controlled combat scenarios. These sessions operate according to strict protocols designed to minimize the risk of permanent injury, while still maintaining the intensity necessary to produce meaningful learning. The combatants wear practice versions of their armor, somewhat less protective than the auromite they will eventually wear in actual combat, but still sufficient to prevent casual strikes from causing serious damage. They use training weapons with powered fields set to non-lethal settings, blades that will still cut flesh if they connect solidly, but which lack the molecular disruption effects of full combat settings. The paired training sessions are supervised by veteran custodians who watch every exchange with attention that borders on the supernatural. These instructors can detect flaws in technique that would be invisible to normal observers, identifying mistakes in timing or positioning that exist for fractions of a second. When they see such errors, they stop the bout immediately, explaining the problem and demonstrating the correct approach. The young custodians absorb this instruction with the same perfect retention that characterizes all their learning, incorporating the corrections into their technique so thoroughly that the same mistake will never be repeated. But solo and paired training represent only the foundation of custodian martial education. The real test comes in massed combat scenarios, where groups of developing custodians face overwhelming odds in simulations designed to push them to their absolute limits. These exercises take place in vast training chambers, where hundreds of combat servitors can be deployed simultaneously, creating tactical situations that would challenge even veteran warriors of any other organization. The servitors used in these training exercises are not the shambling, barely functional creatures that perform menial labor throughout the Imperium. They are sophisticated combat units, many of them built around the bodies of criminals or failed aspirants whose punishment or fate was to serve as practice targets for the Emperor's guardians. Their weapons are live, their targeting systems accurate enough to kill if the trainees make mistakes, their combat programming derived from captured enemy tactics and enhanced with machine efficiency. Fighting them is genuinely dangerous, and developing custodians who show insufficient caution sometimes pay for their errors, with injuries that take even their enhanced healing capabilities weeks to fully repair. These massed combat scenarios serve multiple purposes beyond simple weapons training. They teach the developing custodians to maintain situational awareness in chaotic environments where threats come from every direction. They develop the ability to process multiple streams of information simultaneously, tracking dozens of enemies while maintaining awareness of terrain features, ammunition levels, equipment status, and the positions and conditions of any allied custodians present. They build the mental resilience necessary to maintain peak performance under sustained stress, fighting for hours at a time without food, rest, or relief. Most importantly, these exercises teach custodians to think tactically, even in the heat of combat, to recognize opportunities for decisive action and execute them without hesitation. A developing custodian might notice that the enemy servitors are concentrating their fire on a specific area, creating a momentary gap in their coverage elsewhere. He exploits this gap immediately, moving through it to reach a position where he can enfilade the enemy formation, turning their strength into vulnerability. Or he might recognize that the servitors are using a specific formation that leaves them vulnerable to a particular type of attack, and he executes that attack before they can adapt to his presence. The tactical education that complements this physical training is equally comprehensive. Young custodians study military history from across the entire span of human civilization, from pre-unification terror through the Age of Strife, the Great Crusade, the Horus Heresy, and all the millennia of warfare that have followed. They learn not just the outcomes of famous battles, but the decisions that led to those outcomes, the mistakes that caused defeats, the brilliant insights that produced victories. They study the tactical doctrines of every major military power in the galaxy, from the rigid discipline of the Imperial Guard to the adaptive savagery of greenskin forces, from the sophisticated combined arms approach of the Firecast to the overwhelming psychic might of Eldar war hosts. This historical and tactical knowledge is not taught as abstract theory, but as practical wisdom that will guide their actions in future combat. When a custodian faces a specific enemy, he does so with comprehensive understanding of how that enemy thinks, how they prefer to fight, what their strengths and weaknesses are, how they are likely to respond to different types of pressure. This knowledge allows him to anticipate enemy actions with accuracy that can seem precognitive to observers who do not understand the depth of analysis underlying his predictions. The training also includes extensive education in areas that might seem peripheral to martial capability, but which are essential for warriors who must operate independently without support. Every custodian learns field medicine sufficient to treat not just his own injuries, but those of baseline humans he might encounter during operations. He learns survival skills that allow him to operate indefinitely in hostile environments, extracting water from seemingly barren terrain, identifying edible plant and animal species on worlds he has never visited, creating shelter from available materials. He learns basic technical skills that allow him to repair damaged equipment, modify captured enemy weapons for his own use, or jury-rig solutions to problems that would stymie warriors dependent on specialized support personnel. The psychological conditioning that accompanies this training is designed to produce warriors who can face any horror without flinching, who can make hard decisions without hesitation, who can endure any hardship without complaining. But this conditioning is not the crude brainwashing that might be applied to less sophisticated warriors. The goal is not to create mindless killers, but rather to develop a specific mental architecture that can handle stress and horror without psychological damage, while maintaining the capacity for moral reasoning and ethical judgment. This is achieved through graduated exposure to experiences of increasing intensity. Young custodians are shown images and recordings of atrocities committed by the Imperium's enemies, learning to look upon horrors that would drive normal humans mad without experiencing the psychological damage such exposure would normally cause. They are placed in simulations where they must make impossible choices, scenarios where any decision will result in deaths of innocents, but where inaction would result in even greater casualties. They learn to calculate acceptable losses with cold rationality, while still maintaining enough empathy to recognize the human cost of their decisions. The martial training is conducted by master instructors who are themselves custodians, veterans of battles that span the full 10,000 years since the Emperor's enthronement upon the Golden Throne. These instructors bring to their teaching a perspective that few other warriors in the galaxy can match. They have fought against every enemy the Imperium has faced, from the crude brutality of greenskin hordes to the sophisticated malice of the Drukhari, From the implacable advance of Necron legions to the reality-warping horror of chaos incursions. They have witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties, the birth and death of entire civilizations, the slow grinding advance of the Imperium's borders, and the catastrophic retreats that have marked its darkest hours. This accumulated experience shapes their instruction in ways that cannot be replicated through any amount of simulation or theoretical study. When they teach a developing custodian how to counter a specific attack pattern, they draw upon memories of battles where they faced that exact attack and either succeeded or failed to counter it. When they demonstrate a particular defensive technique, they can explain not just the mechanics of the movement, but the strategic context in which it should be employed, the specific enemies against whom it is most effective, the ways in which it can be adapted to account for environmental factors or unexpected complications. The developing custodian absorbs this knowledge with an efficiency that would seem impossible to anyone unfamiliar with his enhanced cognitive capabilities. His brain, restructured to optimize learning and retention, captures every detail of his instruction with perfect clarity. A technique demonstrated once is remembered forever, available for instant recall and application. A principle explained during a training session becomes part of his fundamental understanding of combat, integrated into his tactical decision-making at an intuitive level that requires no conscious thought to access. As the years pass and the transformation continues, the developing custodian begins to take on duties that, while not yet the full responsibilities of a guardian of the imperial palace, start to prepare him for the role he will eventually fulfill. He might be assigned to watch over specific areas of the palace complex, learning the layout of the vast structure and the routines of the various organizations that operate within it. He might accompany veteran custodians on diplomatic missions to other parts of Terra, observing how they interact with representatives of the various imperial institutions, learning the subtle arts of negotiation and political maneuvering that complement their martial capabilities. These early responsibilities serve multiple purposes beyond simple education. They allow the master gene rights and training instructors to assess the developing custodian's progress, to identify any areas where additional focus might be needed, to ensure that the transformation is proceeding as intended, without complications that might require intervention. They also begin the process of socialization that, while fundamentally different from the brotherhood that defines Space Marine chapters, is nonetheless important for warriors who will eventually operate as part of the 10,000. Unlike Space Marines, custodians do not develop strong bonds of brotherhood with their fellow warriors. The individualistic nature of their creation and training militates against the formation of the kind of squad-based loyalty that characterizes Astartes chapters. A custodian does not have battle brothers in the sense that a Space Marine does, companions whose lives he values as much as his own, whose loss he would mourn with genuine grief. Instead, he recognizes his fellow custodians as peers, warriors of equivalent capability, who share his purpose and his dedication to the Emperor, but who remain fundamentally separate individuals rather than parts of a larger whole. This individualistic approach extends to every aspect of custodian culture. Where a Space Marine chapter maintains rigid hierarchies and expects unquestioning obedience to the chain of command, the Adeptus Custodes operates according to principles that place far more emphasis on individual judgment and autonomy. A custodian is expected to be capable of independent action, to make decisions without requiring orders or guidance, to assess situations and respond appropriately based on his own analysis of the circumstances. This expectation shapes his training from the earliest stages, encouraging him to develop not just martial skill, but also the strategic thinking and political acumen necessary to function effectively without supervision. The psychological conditioning that accompanies the physical transformation and martial training is perhaps the most subtle yet most important aspect of becoming a custodian. Unlike the hypno-indoctrination that creates absolute loyalty in Space Marines, often at the cost of individual personality and capacity for independent thought, The mental shaping applied to custodians is designed to enhance, rather than suppress, their individuality. The goal is not to create an obedient soldier who will follow orders without question, but rather to create a warrior philosopher who can be trusted to act in the emperor's interest, even when separated from all authority and guidance. This conditioning begins with an understanding of history that few other inhabitants of the Imperium possess. A custodian learns the true history of the Imperium, not the sanitized mythology taught to the masses, or even the somewhat more accurate accounts provided to space marines and imperial officers. He learns about the unification wars in detail that would shock most imperial citizens, understanding the brutal pragmatism that characterized the emperor's conquest of Terra. He learns about the Great Crusade, not as a glorious expansion of human dominion, but as a complex military and political operation fraught with challenges, compromises, and decisions that continue to shape the Imperium 10,000 years later. Most significantly, a custodian learns about the Horus heresy from a perspective that is fundamentally different from the one taught to others in the Imperium. While most imperial citizens understand the heresy as a simple narrative of betrayal and redemption, a custodian learns about the political and philosophical conflicts that led to the schism, the warning signs that were missed or ignored, the specific failures that allowed chaos to corrupt so many of the emperor's greatest creations. This knowledge is not provided merely for historical interest. It is meant to ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated, that each custodian understands the full scope of the threats the Imperium faces and the ways in which those threats might manifest. The philosophical education provided to custodians is equally comprehensive. They study the imperial truth, the rationalist philosophy that the emperor promoted during the Great Crusade, understanding both its strengths and its limitations, recognizing why it ultimately failed to prevent the spread of chaos. They study the imperial creed that has replaced it, the religious devotion to the emperor as a god that now binds the Imperium together, analyzing how this belief system serves the Imperium's needs, even as it contradicts the emperor's original vision. They learn to navigate between these competing philosophies, to interact with religious zealots without revealing their own more complex understanding, to use faith as a tool of governance while maintaining their own clearer sight. This complex education, combined with the cognitive enhancements woven into their very biology, produces warriors who are as capable of philosophical debate as they are of martial combat. A custodian can discuss the finer points of imperial theology with an ecclesiarch, analyze the political implications of a trade agreement with an administratum official, or debate military strategy with a Lord Commander of the Imperial Guard, all while remaining ready to respond to threats with the devastating violence that is his primary function. This versatility makes custodians uniquely valuable to the Imperium. Warriors who can serve not just as guards, but as diplomats, advisors, investigators, and troubleshooters capable of handling any situation that might arise. The equipment that a custodian eventually receives represents the culmination of millennia of technological development and represents a level of craftsmanship and material expense that staggers the imagination. Each suit of auramite armor is individually crafted for its wearer, shaped to fit his specific physiology, decorated according to his personal preferences and achievements. The armor is not merely protective gear, but a work of art, every surface engraved with symbolism and history, every component optimized for maximum performance. The process of creating a suit of auramite armor begins years before the custodian who will wear it completes his transformation. Master artificers, craftsmen who have dedicated their entire lives to the art of armor making and who have learned techniques passed down through generations of their craft, begin their work as soon as a custodian candidate shows promise of surviving the transformation process. They take detailed measurements of the developing guardian's body, creating comprehensive three-dimensional models that account for projected growth and final adult dimensions. These models are updated regularly as the candidate continues to develop, ensuring that when the time comes to actually fabricate the armor, every piece will fit with perfect precision. The material from which the armor is constructed, auramite, is found nowhere else in the Imperium. Its composition remains a closely guarded secret, known only to the artificers who work with it, and perhaps to the highest echelons of the Adeptus Mechanicus. What is known is that auramite is harder and lighter than ceramite, the material used in space marine armor, while also possessing superior energy dissipation characteristics that make it highly resistant to weapons that would punch through lesser protection. The metal has a distinctive golden color that requires no surface treatment or coating, making Custodian armor instantly recognizable even from great distances. The properties of auramite go beyond simple physical hardness. The material seems to possess some quality that resists corruption by chaos energies more effectively than any other known substance. Suits of Custodian armor have been recovered from battlefields where they were exposed to warp energies that would have corrupted ceramite armor beyond any hope of purification. Yet the auramite shows no signs of taint. This resistance appears to be an inherent property of the material rather than the result of external blessings or protective wards, though the exact mechanism remains a mystery that scholars have studied for millennia without producing definitive answers. The fabrication process for auramite armor involves techniques that combine advanced metallurgy with rituals that some would call alchemical and others might describe as approaching sorcery, though no one would dare use such terminology where members of the Adeptus Custodes might hear. The artificers work in chambers deep within the imperial palace, in forges where the temperature can be precisely controlled across a range that extends from near absolute zero to levels that would vaporize any normal metal. They use tools, some of which date back to the Unification Wars or earlier, implements whose designs have been refined over millennia of use, but which still embody principles that modern understanding struggles to explain fully. Each component of the armor is crafted individually, with attention to detail that would seem obsessive in any other context. A single pauldron might take an artificer weeks to complete, its surface engraved with scenes depicting the Emperor's great works or the history of the Adeptus Custodes, its internal structure optimized to distribute impact forces in ways that maximize protection while minimizing weight and restriction of movement. The artificer tests each piece repeatedly during fabrication, using sophisticated sensors to measure its performance characteristics, making minute adjustments to ensure that every specification is met or exceeded. The armor's power supply represents another marvel of Imperial technology. Unlike Space Marine armor, which uses relatively conventional power cells that require periodic recharging or replacement, Custodian armor is equipped with microfusion reactors of such sophistication that they can operate for decades without maintenance. These reactors provide not just the power necessary to operate the armor's servo motors and systems, but also generate significant excess capacity that can be used to power the integrated weapons systems, energy shields, and other equipment that a Custodian might carry. The helmet of a Custodian's armor deserves special mention for the sophistication of its systems. The external surface is typically fashioned into the likeness of an eagle or other imperial symbol, a decorative choice that serves the practical purpose of making the Custodian instantly recognizable as the Emperor's own. But beneath this ornate exterior lies a sensor suite that would not be out of place in a sophisticated aerospace fighter or reconnaissance vehicle. Multi-spectrum optics allow the wearer to see clearly in complete darkness, to filter out blinding light, to detect heat signatures through walls, to identify minute details at extreme ranges. Audio pickups can isolate specific sounds from cacophonous backgrounds, detect subsonic vibrations that might indicate approaching enemies, or amplify whispered conversations happening hundreds of meters away. The helmet's communication systems are equally sophisticated, capable of operating across multiple frequencies and encryption protocols simultaneously. A Custodian can maintain secure communications with other members of his shield company while also monitoring open channels used by Allied forces, enemy transmissions if they are broadcasting unencrypted, and even subsurface acoustic signals that might indicate tunnel boring operations or underground movement. The system includes advanced threat warning features that alert the wearer to weapons locks, incoming projectiles, or other dangers, providing crucial fractions of a second of warning that can make the difference between life and death, even for warriors with Custodian reflexes. The weapons that accompany this armor are no less impressive in their craftsmanship and capability. A Guardian Spear, the most iconic weapon of the Adeptus Custodes, is far more than it appears at first glance. The shaft, typically around 2 meters in length, is crafted from the same auramite used in the armor, making it nearly indestructible. But its strength comes not just from material composition, but from an internal structure that incorporates force distribution channels and reinforcement patterns similar to those found in the armor itself. The spear's blade, mounted at one end, combines a power field generator with a molecular disruption edge that can cut through virtually any material. The power field surrounds the physical blade with an envelope of energy that disrupts molecular bonds on contact, allowing the weapon to slice through tank armor as easily as it would cut through flesh. The molecular disruption edge operates at a quantum level, destabilizing the atomic structure of materials it contacts and causing them to simply cease to exist as coherent matter. Together, these two cutting mechanisms make the Guardian Spear capable of penetrating defenses that would laugh off lesser weapons. At the opposite end of the shaft, many Guardian Spears incorporate an integrated bolter, a sophisticated weapon system that is far more capable than the name suggests. Unlike the standard bolters used by Space Marines, which fire a single type of standardized ammunition, the integrated bolter of a Guardian Spear can accommodate multiple ammunition types and switch between them with electronic rapidity. A Custodian might load his weapon with armor-piercing rounds for engagement against heavily armored targets, high explosive rounds for use against massed infantry, or specialized ammunition designed for specific tactical situations. The weapon's targeting system links directly to his armor's sensors, providing aim assistance that ensures near-perfect accuracy, even when firing while moving at full sprint or engaged in close combat. The Sentinel Blade, another common weapon among the Custodes, takes a different approach to the problem of dealing death to the Emperor's enemies. Where the Guardian Spear emphasizes reach and versatility, the Sentinel Blade focuses on pure killing efficiency in close combat. These massive swords, typically as tall as a normal human, are single-edged weapons that combine enormous mass with the same molecular disruption technology found in Guardian Spears. The weight of the blade allows it to cleave through multiple opponents with a single stroke, while the powered edge ensures that even glancing blows prove fatal to anything they contact. Many Custodians who favor Sentinel blades also carry storm shields, defensive equipment that represents perhaps the pinnacle of Imperial protective technology. These shields are not merely slabs of armored material designed to block incoming attacks through physical intervention. They incorporate sophisticated gravitic generators that create localized distortions in space-time, causing incoming projectiles to be deflected away from their intended path. The shields can stop everything from simple slug rounds to sophisticated energy weapons, and they do so without transmitting impact forces to the bearer, allowing a Custodian to stand firm against attacks that would knock a Space Marine from his feet, despite his greater mass and strength. The process of receiving this equipment is itself a rite of passage, a recognition that the transformation from infant candidate to fully realized Custodian is complete. The ceremony, during which a new Custodian is presented with his armor and weapons, involves traditions that date back to the Unification Wars, rituals witnessed by veteran Custodians, and occasionally by representatives of other Imperial organizations. The new Custodian swears oaths of service that, while similar in intent to those taken by Space Marines or Imperial Guard officers, are different in their specificity and their scope. He does not swear to obey orders or to fight alongside his brothers. Instead, he swears to guard the Emperor, to preserve his work, to act always in accordance with his will as he understands it. This last phrase is crucial and represents a fundamental difference between custodians and virtually every other armed force in the Imperium. A custodian's oath requires him to act according to his own understanding of the Emperor's will, which means he must constantly evaluate his actions against that standard, must think for himself rather than simply following orders. This places an enormous burden of responsibility on each individual custodian, requiring a level of moral reasoning and ethical judgment that would be considered dangerous in most military contexts. But it also creates a force of warriors who can be trusted to act appropriately in any situation, who will make the right decision even when all authority structures have broken down and all communication has been lost. The organizational structure of the Adeptus Custodes reflects this emphasis on individual capability and judgment. While there are ranks and positions of authority within the 10,000, these are more about coordination and specialization than about rigid hierarchy. A custodian assigned to a specific role, whether as one of the Emperor's companions who stand watch directly over the Golden Throne, as part of a shield company that deploys to threats beyond Terra, or as a lone operative investigating potential dangers to the Imperium, is expected to fulfill his duties without constant oversight or detailed orders. He knows what needs to be done because his training and his understanding of the Emperor's will make it obvious. He has the skills and resources necessary to do it because his transformation and equipment have made him capable of handling virtually any challenge he might face. The concept of the Shield Company deserves particular attention as it represents the primary organizational unit through which custodians operate when deploying beyond Terra. A typical shield company numbers approximately 100 custodians, though the exact composition varies depending on the mission and the preferences of the shield captain who leads it. Unlike Space Marine companies, which maintain strict organizational structures with clearly defined roles and specializations, shield companies are far more fluid in their composition and operation. Each custodian in a shield company is a complete warrior in his own right, capable of performing any role that might be required during operations. There are no dedicated heavy weapons specialists or assault troops or tactical marines, no rigid squad structures or predetermined tactical formations. Instead, shield companies operate according to principles of flexible response and adaptive tactics, with each member making independent decisions about how best to contribute to the overall mission objective. This might seem like a recipe for chaos, for a force with no coordination or mutual support, but in practice, the combination of enhanced cognitive capabilities, comprehensive tactical education, and absolute clarity of purpose allows shield companies to operate with a coordination that appears almost telepathic to outside observers. The leadership of a shield company is equally different from conventional military structures. The shield captain, who nominally commands the force, is not so much a commander who issues orders as a coordinator who ensures that the various independent actions of the shield company's members align toward common objectives. He does not tell his custodians what to do in specific situations, but rather communicates the overall strategic situation and mission objectives, trusting each member to determine the best way to contribute. This approach requires shield captains who combine tactical brilliance with political acumen and deep understanding of both their fellow custodians and the enemies they face. The decision-making process within a shield company can seem baffling to observers trained in more conventional military traditions. There are no formal briefings where orders are delivered and acknowledged, no chain of command through which information flows and directives are transmitted. Instead, before an operation begins, the shield company gathers, and the shield captain shares what he knows about the situation, the threats they face, the objectives they must achieve. Then the custodians discuss the matter among themselves, not seeking consensus or waiting for orders, but rather ensuring that everyone understands the full context of what they are about to do. This discussion might last anywhere from a few minutes to several hours, depending on the complexity of the situation. During it, individual custodians contribute their knowledge and expertise, sharing insights about enemy capabilities, suggesting possible approaches to specific tactical problems, identifying potential complications that others might not have considered. The shield captain does not dominate this discussion, but rather facilitates it, asking questions that draw out relevant information, steering the conversation toward productive analysis of key issues. When the discussion concludes, there is no formal decision or vote or issuing of orders. Instead, each custodian simply knows what he needs to do, has formulated his own plan for how to contribute to the mission, and understands how his actions will complement those of his fellows. This approach to operations would fail catastrophically for any force composed of less capable warriors. It requires individuals who can think tactically and strategically in real time, who can assess rapidly changing situations and adapt their plans without needing to consult with higher authority, who can coordinate their actions with others through minimal communication and shared understanding of objectives, rather than through detailed orders and rehearsed responses. The Adeptus Custodes possess all these capabilities in abundance, making them perhaps the only military force in the galaxy that can operate effectively without conventional command structures. The deployment of shield companies follows procedures that emphasize rapid response and overwhelming application of force. When a threat is identified that requires custodian intervention, the response is not gradual or measured, but immediate and decisive. A shield company can deploy from Terra to anywhere in the Imperium within days, or sometimes hours, using priority access to warp routes and clearance to commandeer any Imperial vessel required for transport. Once they arrive in a threat zone, they do not waste time with reconnaissance or gradual escalation, but strike directly at the heart of the problem with violence calculated to achieve objectives in the shortest possible time. This aggressive approach serves multiple purposes. It ensures that threats are eliminated before they can metastasize into larger problems. It demonstrates Imperial power in ways that discourage future challenges, and it minimizes the time that precious custodian resources are committed to any single operation, allowing them to be redeployed to other threats as quickly as possible. The result is a force that appears to be everywhere at once, striking at threats across the Imperium with a rapidity and decisiveness that leaves enemies reeling and allies grateful for their intervention. Individual custodians operating alone or in small groups represent an even more flexible and responsive capability. These lone guardians might be dispatched to investigate potential threats that do not yet warrant shield company deployment, to serve as the Emperor's representatives in delicate diplomatic situations, to provide expert counsel to other Imperial organizations facing challenges beyond their expertise, or to handle problems that require subtlety rather than overwhelming force. Their operations span the full range of Imperial concerns, from rooting out corruption in planetary governments to negotiating with Xenos powers when extermination is not practical, from recovering lost Imperial artifacts to eliminating specific individuals whose continued existence poses unacceptable risks to the Imperium. The authority that individual custodians carry when operating independently is something that other Imperial institutions struggle to fully comprehend. They answer to no one except the Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, and ultimately to the Emperor himself. They can commandeer resources from any Imperial organization, demand cooperation from any Imperial official, access information classified at the highest levels of secrecy. When a custodian appears and identifies himself as operating on the Emperor's business, the only acceptable response is immediate and complete cooperation. Failure to provide this cooperation, or worse, active resistance to a custodian's investigation or actions, is considered treason of the highest order and typically results in immediate execution, followed by thorough investigation of the executed individual's entire organization. This extraordinary authority is balanced by the judgment and restraint that characterize custodian operations. Despite their power to act unilaterally, Custodians generally prefer to work through existing imperial structures when possible, understanding that ham-fisted intervention can cause more problems than it solves. They investigate thoroughly before taking action, gathering evidence and building comprehensive understanding of situations before making decisions about how to proceed. They recognize that their primary purpose is to serve the Emperor's interests, and those interests are often better served by subtle influence and careful manipulation than by displays of overwhelming force. The relationship between the Adeptus Custodes and the broader imperial power structure is complex and sometimes fraught with tension. On paper, custodians operate outside the normal chain of command, answerable only to their own leadership and ultimately to the Emperor. In practice, this creates situations where custodian actions or investigations can conflict with the interests of powerful imperial institutions or influential individuals. A custodian investigating corruption within a planetary government might uncover information that implicates officials in the administratum or even the Inquisition. A shield company responding to a threat might arrive at a war zone where Space Marine chapters or Imperial Guard armies are already engaged, complicating the command situation and raising questions about authority and responsibility. These situations require careful navigation, combining firm assertion of custodian prerogatives with diplomatic recognition of other organizations' legitimate interests and concerns. The custodians generally handle such situations with skill born of their comprehensive education and understanding of imperial politics. They know when to press their advantage and when to compromise, when to exercise their authority overtly and when to work through unofficial channels, when to confront challenges directly and when to achieve their objectives through more subtle means. This approach to military organization would be completely unworkable for any force larger than the 10,000. It requires warriors of such capability and judgment that they can genuinely be trusted to act independently without descending into chaos or pursuing personal agendas. It requires a level of cognitive enhancement that allows for complex strategic thinking without the guidance of a command structure. And it requires a depth of indoctrination and psychological conditioning that ensures absolute loyalty to purpose, if not to specific individuals. The comparison between custodians and space marines, while inevitable, given that both are superhuman warriors created through genetic modification to serve the Emperor, ultimately reveals more differences than similarities. At the most fundamental level, space marines are created to be soldiers, components in a larger military machine that operates through combined arms tactics, mutual support, and hierarchical command structures. Custodians are created to be warriors in the most complete sense of the word. Individuals so capable that they require no support, no direction, no backup, able to assess any situation and respond appropriately through their own initiative and judgment. This difference manifests in every aspect of how the two forces are created and trained. Space Marine aspirants are selected in late childhood or adolescence, usually from populations that have already demonstrated martial prowess through survival in harsh environments or success in local conflicts. Custodian candidates are selected in infancy from specific bloodlines, identified through genetic analysis that predicts compatibility with the transformation process. Space Marines undergo a standardized transformation process that implants additional organs into their bodies, augmenting their baseline human physiology with new systems designed for specific functions. Custodians undergo an alchemical transformation that rewrites their genetics at the fundamental level, creating a new form of life that, while derived from human stock, is something fundamentally different. The training methodologies employed by the two organizations reflect these different creation philosophies. Space Marines are trained in large groups, learning to operate as part of a squad, developing the bonds of brotherhood that will sustain them through decades of warfare. Their training emphasizes coordination, mutual support, and adherence to chapter doctrine. Custodians are trained more individually, with instruction tailored to the specific aptitudes and characteristics of each developing guardian. Their training emphasizes independence, versatility, and the development of personal judgment that will allow them to operate effectively without external support. The equipment provided to the two forces shows similar disparities. Space Marine wargear, while sophisticated and powerful, is designed for mass production and standardization. A tactical Marine's bolter is essentially identical to that carried by millions of other tactical Marines across thousands of chapters. A Custodian's Guardian spear is unique, crafted specifically for him, incorporating design elements and technological features that make it unlike any other weapon in existence. The same principle applies to their armor. Space Marine power armor is built to standardized patterns that have remained essentially unchanged for millennia, while Custodian Auramite armor is individually crafted and customized to an extent that would be considered wasteful luxury in any other military context. These differences in creation, training, and equipment produce warriors who, while both superhuman, operate according to completely different principles. A Space Marine excels as part of a larger force, his effectiveness multiplied by coordination with his brothers and subordination to a larger tactical plan. A Custodian excels individually, capable of achieving objectives that would require an entire squad of Space Marines, able to operate effectively in situations where mutual support and coordination are impossible. Neither approach is inherently superior. They serve different purposes within the Imperium's vast military apparatus. But understanding these differences is essential to understanding what it means to become a Custodian rather than a Space Marine. The role that Custodians fulfill within the Imperium has evolved significantly over the 10,000 years since the Emperor's enthronement upon the Golden Throne. During the Great Crusade and the early Imperium, their purpose was clear and simple. They were the Emperor's personal bodyguards, warriors who stood at his side and protected his person from any threat. The Horus Heresy, and specifically the Emperor's near death during his final confrontation with Horus, represented a catastrophic failure of this primary mission, one that scarred the Custodians as a collective and led to significant changes in how they understood their role. Following the heresy, the Adeptus Custodes largely withdrew from operations beyond Terra, dedicating themselves almost exclusively to guarding the Imperial Palace and the Golden Throne within it. This withdrawal was driven by a combination of guilt over their perceived failure during the heresy and a determination to never again allow any threat to approach the Emperor's physical form. For thousands of years, the 10,000 remained within the palace, unknown to most Imperial citizens, regarded as legends or myths by those who had heard stories of the golden-armored giants who served the Emperor directly. This isolation ended relatively recently in the Imperium's long history, when events during the opening of the Great Rift forced the Custodians to reevaluate their role. Faced with threats that endangered not just Terra, but the entire Imperium, the Adeptus Custodes recognized that the best way to protect the Emperor was not to stand guard over his physical form, but to preserve the Imperium he had created, to ensure that his work endured even as he remained trapped in the half-life of the Golden Throne. This recognition led to a fundamental shift in Custodian operations, with shield companies deploying beyond Terra to address threats throughout the Imperium, and individual Custodians undertaking missions that sometimes took them to the furthest edges of Imperial space. These deployments revealed capabilities that had been largely hidden during the millennia of isolation. A shield company of Custodians, typically numbering no more than 100 warriors, proved capable of operations that would normally require entire Space Marine chapters or Imperial Guard armies. Their ability to operate independently, to make tactical and strategic decisions without requiring orders from higher authority, to adapt to changing circumstances with a flexibility that more hierarchical forces could not match, made them uniquely effective in addressing complex threats that conventional military responses could not handle. Individual Custodians, operating alone or in small groups, demonstrated even more impressive versatility. Serving as investigators, diplomats, troubleshooters, and sometimes executioners, These lone guardians addressed problems ranging from potential corruption within imperial governance to Xenos threats that required subtlety rather than overwhelming force. Their comprehensive education, their enhanced cognitive capabilities, and their reputation as the Emperor's personal representatives gave them access to information and cooperation that even Inquisitors sometimes struggled to obtain. When a Custodian appeared to investigate a matter, entire planetary governments would mobilize to assist him, knowing that failure to cooperate would be reported directly to the highest levels of imperial authority. Notable Custodians throughout the Imperium's history have demonstrated the full scope of what these warriors can achieve. Constantin Valdor, the first Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, served at the Emperor's side from the earliest days of the Unification Wars through the Horus Heresy. His tactical genius and personal combat prowess instrumental in countless victories. His disappearance shortly after the heresy remains one of the great mysteries of imperial history, with various theories suggesting everything from a secret mission assigned by the Emperor himself to death in battle against forces whose existence has been expunged from all records. Trajan Valoris, the current Captain General, represents the modern Custodian in many ways, balancing the traditional role of Guardian with the new understanding that protecting the Emperor requires engaging with threats throughout the Imperium. His leadership during the Terran Crusade, the campaign that cleared Terra's star system of the demon incursions that occurred during the Great Rift's opening, demonstrated tactical acumen that impressed even the Primarch Robert Guilliman. His diplomatic efforts to coordinate Imperial responses to various threats have helped maintain unity during one of the most perilous periods in Imperial history. Other Custodians, whose names are not as widely known, but whose achievements are no less significant, have served the Emperor in ways that range from the obvious to the subtle. Some have led shield companies in campaigns that destroyed threats before they could fully manifest, preventing catastrophes that would have consumed entire sectors. Others have operated as lone agents, their investigations uncovering corruption or heresy that had penetrated to the highest levels of imperial governance, their interventions preventing disasters that conventional imperial institutions never even recognized as developing. The daily life of a Custodian, when not deployed on active operations, consists of routines that most imperial citizens would find difficult to comprehend. They do not sleep in the manner that normal humans understand sleep, their enhanced physiology requiring only brief periods of rest that might last a few hours every several days. They do not eat conventional meals, their digestive system so efficient that they can extract complete nutrition from surprisingly small amounts of food. They do not engage in recreation or leisure activities in any normal sense. Their minds too active and their sense of duty too strong to allow for frivolous pastimes. Instead, Custodians spend their time in activities that most people would consider work, but which they regard as merely different aspects of their service. They train constantly, practicing techniques they have already mastered thousands of times. Because perfection is not a destination, but a journey that never ends. They study, reading texts on subjects ranging from military history to philosophy to xenobiology. Because a Custodian can never know too much, and any knowledge might prove relevant in future operations. They maintain their equipment, performing rituals of care and blessing that are part maintenance and part meditation, ensuring that their armor and weapons remain in perfect condition while also reinforcing their connection to these tools of their trade. The relationship between Custodians and other imperial organizations is complex and often challenging. Most imperial institutions regard the Adeptus Custodes with a mixture of reverence and unease. On one hand, everyone recognizes that Custodians speak with the Emperor's authority, that their word carries weight beyond any normal chain of command. On the other hand, their presence usually indicates serious problems, threats significant enough to warrant the attention of the Emperor's personal guardians, and their investigations can expose uncomfortable truths about corruption, incompetence, or heresy that those being investigated would prefer remain hidden. Space Marine chapters generally maintain respectful relations with the Custodians, recognizing them as fellow servants of the Emperor whose capabilities exceed even those of the Adeptus Astartes. However, tensions sometimes arise from the fundamental differences in how the two forces operate. Space Marines are used to acting within clear hierarchies and following established chains of command. Custodians operate with an independence that can seem reckless or even insubordinate to those unfamiliar with how the 10,000 function. A Custodian might countermand orders given by a Space Marine chapter master if he judges those orders to be contrary to the Emperor's will, creating situations that require careful diplomacy to resolve without damaging the working relationship between the two forces. The Inquisition, the organization most similar to the Custodians in terms of operating independently with broad authority, maintains perhaps the most complicated relationship with the 10,000. Inquisitors are used to being the highest authority in most situations, answerable only to their peers and ultimately to the Emperor himself. The presence of a Custodian, who answers to no one but the Emperor and who possesses capabilities far beyond those of any Inquisitor, can create tensions around questions of jurisdiction and authority. Most Inquisitors are wise enough to recognize that attempting to assert authority over a Custodian is both futile and dangerous, but there have been instances where pride or stubbornness led to conflicts that ended poorly for the Inquisitors involved. The philosophical understanding that guides Custodian actions is perhaps best understood through the concept of the Emperor's will. Unlike Space Marines, who follow the orders of their chapter masters and ultimately the Codex Astartes, Custodians operate according to their understanding of what the Emperor would want them to do in any given situation. This might seem like a recipe for chaos, for warriors going rogue and pursuing personal agendas while claiming to act in the Emperor's name. But the depth of conditioning and education that shapes a Custodian's mind makes such deviations essentially impossible. A Custodian understands the Emperor's will not as a set of specific commands, but as a philosophical framework that guides decision-making. He knows what the Emperor valued: the survival and prosperity of humanity, the advancement of human civilization, the protection of humanity from Xenos threats, and the corruption of chaos. He understands the Emperor's methods, pragmatic rather than ideological, willing to make compromises when necessary to achieve larger goals, capable of both mercy and ruthlessness, depending on what the situation required. And he recognizes the Emperor's vision: a galaxy where humanity dominates, where the threats of Xenos and chaos have been eliminated or contained, where human civilization can develop without the constant existential threats that have defined its history since the Age of Strife. Armed with this understanding, a Custodian evaluates every situation he encounters through the lens of how the Emperor would respond. What actions would best serve the goals of human survival and advancement? This evaluation happens almost instantaneously, his enhanced cognitive capabilities processing relevant factors and reaching conclusions in the time it takes a normal human to recognize they need to make a decision. The result is action that appears decisive and confident, but is actually the product of analysis so rapid and comprehensive that it resembles intuition more than conscious thought. The psychological cost of being a Custodian, while rarely discussed even among the 10,000 themselves, is nonetheless real and significant. The transformation process that creates a Custodian strips away much of what defines normal human existence: the need for companionship, the desire for recognition or advancement, the fear of death, the hope for a future beyond the immediate demands of duty. What remains is a consciousness that exists almost entirely in the service of purpose, that finds meaning and satisfaction only in the fulfillment of its function as guardian of the Emperor and the Imperium. This creates a form of existence that most humans would find unbearable. A Custodian has no real personal life, no relationships that are not defined by duty, no aspirations beyond continued service. He will never have a family, never pursue personal interests or hobbies, never retire to a peaceful existence after his service is complete. His life is service, from the moment of his selection as an infant through whatever death eventually claims him, whether in battle against the Imperium's enemies or simply through the gradual failure of even his enhanced biology after centuries or millennia of existence. Yet custodians do not seem to suffer from this existence in the way that normal humans would. The psychological conditioning woven into their minds makes service feel natural rather than burdensome, makes duty feel fulfilling rather than restrictive. They genuinely cannot imagine wanting anything other than what they have, cannot conceive of a form of existence that would be preferable to their role as guardians. This is not brainwashing in any crude sense, but rather a fundamental restructuring of priorities and values that makes them psychologically suited for their role in the same way that their physical transformation makes them physically suited for it. The question of whether this psychological conditioning represents a loss of humanity or a transcendence of human limitations is one that philosophers and theologians have debated for millennia. Some argue that custodians have sacrificed their humanity on the altar of duty, that they are no longer truly human in any meaningful sense, despite their biological origins. Others contend that custodians represent the purest expression of human potential, that they embody virtues like loyalty, courage, and dedication to a degree that reveals what humanity could become if freed from the weaknesses and limitations that characterize baseline human existence. The custodians themselves rarely engage with such philosophical debates. They know what they are: tools created by the Emperor to serve specific purposes, weapons with consciousness but no real will beyond the will to serve. Whether this makes them more or less than human seems irrelevant to them. What matters is whether they fulfill their function, whether they guard the Emperor effectively, whether they preserve his work and advance his goals. All other considerations are secondary at best, distractions at worst. The future of the Adeptus Custodes remains uncertain in ways that would have seemed impossible during the earlier millennia of their existence. For thousands of years, their role was clear and unchanging: guard the imperial palace, protect the Golden Throne, maintain their vigil until the Emperor's eventual return to active leadership. But the realities of the current age have complicated this simple mission. The Great Rift has split the Imperium in half, creating threats that cannot be addressed through passive defense. The return of Primarch Robert Guilliman has introduced new variables into imperial politics and military strategy. The discovery of new warp-based transportation routes and the emergence of previously unknown threats have created situations that demand custodian intervention in ways that previous generations never imagined. These changing circumstances have forced the Adeptus Custodes to evolve, to expand their understanding of their mission while remaining true to their fundamental purpose. Shield companies now deploy throughout the Imperium on operations that would have been unthinkable during the long millennia of isolation. Individual custodians serve as advisors to other imperial institutions, their presence helping to coordinate responses to threats that span multiple organizations and sectors. The 10,000 have become more visible, more active, more engaged with the broader Imperium than at any time since the Horus Heresy. This evolution has not been without controversy, even within the ranks of the custodians themselves. Some argue that the expansion of operations beyond Terra represents mission creep, that it diverts resources and attention from the primary duty of protecting the Emperor's physical form. Others contend that the best way to protect the Emperor is to preserve the Imperium he created, that allowing the Imperium to collapse while maintaining a perfect vigil over his body would represent a failure far more profound than any temporary weakening of the palace's defenses. These debates continue, conducted with the philosophical rigor and intellectual honesty that characterize custodian discourse on any subject. The process of becoming a custodian represents perhaps the most extreme transformation that a human being can undergo while still remaining, in some sense, human. From selection as an infant through decades of alchemical transformation, comprehensive education, and intensive training, to final acceptance as one of the 10,000, with the presentation of armor and weapons that represent the pinnacle of imperial craftsmanship, the journey is one that fundamentally rewrites everything about the individual undergoing it. The infant selected from Terran nobility and the custodian, who eventually emerges from the transformation process, share genetic material and a nominal continuity of identity. But in almost every other respect, they are different beings. This transformation is not undertaken lightly or frequently. The resources required to create a single custodian could equip entire regiments of Imperial Guard or fund the creation of dozens of Space Marines. The time investment spans decades, requiring the attention of master gene wrights and veteran instructors whose expertise is irreplaceable. The mortality rate, while lower than that of Space Marine creation due to the more controlled and carefully monitored process, is still significant, with many candidates failing to survive the transformation despite the best efforts of those overseeing it. Yet despite these costs, the Imperium continues to create new custodians, maintaining the strength of the 10,000 at levels sufficient to fulfill their expanded role. This commitment reflects a recognition of the unique value these warriors provide, capabilities that cannot be replicated through any other means. A single custodian, operating independently with full awareness of his mission and complete confidence in his ability to achieve it, can accomplish objectives that would require complex operations involving multiple Imperial organizations. A shield company can address threats that would otherwise demand the attention of entire Space Marine chapters or Imperial Guard armies. The 10,000 as a whole represent a strategic asset of incalculable value, a force that can be deployed anywhere in the Imperium with confidence that they will succeed in whatever mission they undertake. The genetic legacy that produces custodian candidates continues to be carefully maintained by the noble families of Terra. These bloodlines understand their role in ways that transcend simple aristocratic privilege. They know that their true purpose is not political power or dynastic continuation, but rather the preservation of genetic material that makes the creation of future custodians possible. They maintain careful records of marriages and births, ensuring that favorable genetic markers continue to appear in their descendants. They submit their children to examination by tech priests who search for the subtle variations that indicate compatibility with the transformation process. And when one of their sons is selected, they accept his loss with a mixture of pride and sorrow, knowing that he will become something greater than they can imagine, but also that he will be lost to them forever. This system has worked for 10,000 years, producing a steady stream of candidates sufficient to maintain the strength of the Adeptus Custodes, despite losses to combat, accidents, and the simple attrition that claims even enhanced warriors over the millennia. But it is not without vulnerabilities. The noble families involved are concentrated on Terra, making them potential targets for enemies who understand the importance of the genetic material they preserve. The selection criteria are narrow, excluding vast swathes of human genetic diversity that might contain individuals capable of becoming excellent custodians if given the chance. And the time required to transform a candidate from infant to fully realized guardian means that the Adeptus Custodes cannot rapidly replace losses or expand their numbers in response to changing strategic requirements. These limitations have occasionally prompted discussions about potential reforms to the creation process. Some have suggested expanding the pool of candidate families beyond Terra, identifying bloodlines on other worlds that might carry similar genetic markers. Others have proposed research into ways to accelerate the transformation process, reducing the decades-long timeline to something more manageable. Still others have advocated for modifications to the creation process that would increase success rates, ensuring that fewer candidates are lost during transformation. All such proposals have been rejected, not out of conservative adherence to tradition, but because of practical recognition that the current process, while expensive and time-consuming, produces results that cannot be improved upon without unacceptable risks. The genetic markers that identify suitable candidates are the product of specific combinations that appear rarely even within the noble families that carry them. Expanding the search to other populations would require resources better spent on other priorities and might not yield additional candidates in sufficient numbers to justify the effort. Accelerating the transformation process would almost certainly increase mortality rates and might produce custodians whose capabilities fell short of the standards that define the 10,000. And modifications to the creation process itself risk corrupting the alchemical procedures that have produced perfect warriors for 10 millennia. The result is a system that, while not perfect, has proven remarkably stable and reliable over an almost inconceivable span of time. The same basic procedures used to create modern custodians differ only in minor details from those employed during the Unification Wars. The same selection criteria identify candidates with the same accuracy. The same training methodologies produce warriors with the same capabilities. This continuity is itself a form of strength, ensuring that every generation of custodians meets the same standards that defined the 10,000 from their inception. Understanding what it takes to become a custodian requires recognizing that the process is not merely about physical transformation or martial training, though both are certainly involved. At its deepest level, becoming a custodian represents a philosophical commitment to service that transcends normal human understanding. The infant selected for transformation cannot make this commitment consciously, of course, but the decision made on his behalf by others shapes everything that follows. Every aspect of his transformation, every element of his education, every moment of his training is designed to produce a warrior who does not merely serve the emperor, but who is incapable of imagining any other form of existence. This might seem like a form of slavery, the creation of beings with no free will or capacity for self-determination. But the reality is more complex. Custodians do possess free will in that they make decisions, evaluate situations, and choose courses of action based on their own analysis and judgment. What they lack is the desire to use that free will for anything other than service to the emperor. Their wants and the emperor's needs are perfectly aligned, not because they have been forced into obedience, but because they have been shaped at the most fundamental level to desire only what the emperor would want them to desire. Whether this represents a horrifying loss of autonomy or an enlightened transcendence of selfish concerns depends on one's philosophical perspective. From a utilitarian standpoint, custodians represent the optimal solution to the problem of creating guardians who can be absolutely trusted, warriors whose loyalty cannot be corrupted, whose judgment cannot be compromised, whose dedication will never falter regardless of circumstances. From a humanistic perspective, the same transformation that creates these perfect guardians destroys much of what makes individuals truly human. The capacity for personal growth, the ability to change and evolve, the freedom to choose one's own path through life. The custodians themselves, as noted, rarely concern themselves with such questions. They know what they are, what they have been created to be, and they fulfill that purpose with a completeness that most humans never achieve in any aspect of their lives. If there is tragedy in their existence, it lies not in any suffering they experience, but in the absoluteness of their dedication, the totality of their commitment to a purpose that will consume their entire existence from beginning to end. The Emperor, in creating the Adeptus Custodes, demonstrated a level of foresight and understanding of human nature that few of his other works can match. He recognized that the greatest threats to any ruler come not from external enemies, but from those closest to him, those with the access and opportunity to betray. By creating guardians who were literally incapable of betrayal, whose loyalty was woven into their genes and reinforced by every aspect of their training and conditioning, He solved a problem that has plagued leaders throughout human history. The Adeptus Custodes have never betrayed the Emperor, never wavered in their loyalty, never faltered in their dedication to his protection and the preservation of his work. This perfect loyalty has not prevented all tragedies. The Emperor was still struck down during the Horus Heresy, still confined to the Golden Throne, still reduced to a state that cannot properly be called life. But these failures resulted from limitations in custodian numbers and capabilities, rather than from any deficiency in their loyalty or dedication. They fought to the last, defending the Emperor, and when they could not prevent his wounding, they dedicated themselves to ensuring that his sacrifice would not be in vain, that the Imperium he created would endure despite his incapacity. In the 10,000 years since, the Custodians have maintained this vigil with a steadfastness that would be admirable if it were the product of choice, but which is simply the nature of their being. They cannot abandon their posts, cannot neglect their duties, cannot allow personal considerations to interfere with their service. They are, in the most literal sense, perfect guardians, warriors whose existence justifies every resource invested in their creation, every year spent on their transformation and training. The process of becoming a custodian, then, is not a journey that can be undertaken by choice or achieved through effort. It is a transformation imposed on infants too young to understand what is being done to them, a remaking of body and mind so thorough that what emerges at the end bears little resemblance to the baseline human who began the process. It is a path that only a tiny fraction of humanity can walk, limited to those who carry specific genetic markers and are selected by processes that most will never fully understand. And it is a commitment that once made cannot be unmade, that defines every aspect of existence from the moment of selection until whatever death eventually claims even these enhanced warriors. For those few who complete this transformation, who survive the decades of alchemical treatment and training to take their place among the 10,000, the reward is not glory or recognition, but simply the opportunity to serve. They guard the Emperor not because they are ordered to, but because guarding him is what they are, the purpose for which they were created, and the only form of existence they can imagine. They fight the Imperium's enemies not for personal glory or advancement, but because protecting the Emperor's work requires eliminating threats to the civilization he created. They endure isolation, danger, and the slow passage of centuries not as sacrifices they make, but as natural aspects of existence that require no more thought or complaint than breathing. In creating the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor achieves something unique in the history of warfare, a military force whose reliability is absolute, whose loyalty cannot be questioned, whose capabilities approach the theoretical limits of what enhanced human warriors can achieve. The price of creating such warriors is measured in resources, time, and the human potential of the candidates who undergo transformation. Whether this price is justified depends on one's assessment of the custodian's value to the Imperium, but by any objective measure, they have more than earned their place as guardians of humanity's greatest achievement. The final irony of becoming a custodian is that success in the transformation process brings not triumph or celebration, but simply continuation. The day a custodian receives his armor and weapons, the day he takes his first watch as a full member of the 10,000, is not the end of a journey, but the beginning of service that will continue for as long as he survives. There are no retirement years in a custodian's future, no peaceful conclusion to a career of service. There is only duty, repeated day after day, year after year, century after century, until death finally claims even his enhanced form. And yet, if one could ask a custodian whether he would choose a different path, whether he would prefer a normal human existence with its joys and sorrows, its freedoms and limitations, the answer would be the same from every one of the 10,000. They would choose exactly what they are, because being a custodian is not merely what they do, but what they are at the most fundamental level. The transformation that created them did not just give them new abilities or impose new duties. It made them into beings for whom service is not obligation, but fulfillment, for whom duty is not burden, but purpose, for whom guarding the Emperor is not merely the mission they have been assigned, but the reason they exist at all. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods, the Adeptus Custodes stand as proof that humanity can achieve something approaching perfection in at least one narrow domain. They are what they are meant to be, nothing more and nothing less. Guardians of gold who watch over humanity's greatest hope with a dedication that will endure as long as the Imperium itself. If you found this exploration of what it takes to become a custodian illuminating, if you appreciated the depth of detail and the comprehensive look at these legendary warriors, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are many more stories from the Warhammer 40,000 universe to explore, many more aspects of the grim darkness of the far future to examine, and your support helps make that continued exploration possible. The Emperor protects, but your engagement helps too. Until next time, may your vigil be watchful and your purpose clear.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.